Imagine waking up to a world where every gas pump is dry. Where airplanes are grounded, container ships drift listlessly in the ocean, and the trucks that deliver food to your grocery store have stopped dead on the highway. Oil, the lifeblood of our modern world, has simply run out. This isn't a future crisis, a looming threat to be managed, it's a sudden, definitive end. What would happen to a world so utterly dependent on a single resource, a world where the very engine of civilization has ground to a halt? For over a century, oil has been the fuel that powers our lives. It has enabled us to travel vast distances, to build soaring cities, and to feed billions of people. It is in our plastics, our medicines, and our clothes. Our entire global economy, our modern way of life, is built on a foundation of black gold. But what if that foundation was suddenly gone? The impact wouldn't be gradual, it would be a sudden, jarring stop. The immediate fallout would be a mix of chaos and a horrifying stillness. This is a journey into a global catastrophe, a look at the chaos of the immediate aftermath, and a speculative glimpse at the world that would be forced to emerge from the ashes of a fossil-fueled age. This is the story of humanity without fuel, a return to a more primitive, and in some ways more resilient, way of life. The global halt, the first 72 hours in the immediate wake of oil's disappearance, the world would experience a universal and profound silence. The first 72 hours would be a descent into a chaotic and frightening new reality. The most immediate and visible effect would be on transportation. Every car, truck, bus, and motorcycle running on an internal combustion engine would be useless. The roads, once arteries of commerce, would become graveyards of metal. Public transportation systems in cities would seize up, trapping millions of people and creating an instant urban crisis. The suburban way of life, built around the car, would become untenable. Families would be stranded, unable to get to work, to school, or even to the nearest hospital. The global economy would suffer a fatal heart attack. The vast network of international shipping, which moves over 90% of the world's goods, would simply stop. Massive container ships would become floating islands, their precious cargo of electronics, raw materials, and finished goods trapped at sea. This would trigger an immediate and irreversible collapse of the supply chain. The shelves of grocery stores would empty within a week. Factories that rely on a constant flow of parts would shut down. The just-in-time delivery system, the backbone of modern commerce, would prove to be a fatal flaw. The world's financial markets, recognizing the scale of the catastrophe, would implode, plunging every nation into an unprecedented economic depression. As a result, a massive humanitarian crisis would begin to unfold. In the first few days, the initial panic would lead to riots over the last remaining food and bottled water. But as the days turn into weeks, the problem would shift from panic to pure survival. In major cities, with no way to transport food from rural areas, starvation would become a widespread reality. Hospitals would be unable to receive medicine and medical supplies, and their backup generators would run out of fuel. Millions would suffer and die from lack of basic necessities. This would be a return to a pre-industrial age, a brutal relearning of what it means to live in a world without the luxury of easy mobility. The first few weeks would be a brutal test of humanity, a period where communities would either band together to survive or turn on each other in a desperate fight for the last remaining resources. The scramble for survival, a world divided as the initial shock wears off, the global response would be defined by a desperate scramble for survival. The world would not unite, it would fragment. Nations would turn inward, and old alliances would crumble in the face of a new reality. The geopolitical landscape would be completely transformed. Countries with large agricultural sectors and access to natural resources like water would become the new superpowers, while nations that once wielded power through technology and finance would be left powerless. Internally, the concept of a nation-state as we know it would begin to erode. With no central authority to enforce order or distribute resources, power would devolve to the local level. Cities would become self-governing city-states, their populations either trapped by the lack of fuel or ruled by new, armed factions. Rural areas, which still have access to food and water, would become fortified strongholds, with residents defending their resources from the urban refugees. A new form of feudalism might emerge, with local warlords or community leaders controlling access to essential resources and providing protection in exchange for loyalty and labor. The rule of law would be replaced by the law of the strong, and the social contract that holds modern society together would be torn to shreds. In this new world, innovation would be driven by necessity, not profit. The race to find a viable alternative to oil would be a global priority. Scientists would be tasked with a singular, Existential goal: to unlock a new source of energy that can power a new civilization. Solar, wind, and geothermal power, once niche industries, would be the only hope for a new world. The development of these technologies would be accelerated at a breakneck pace, but their implementation would be slow and difficult without the very fuel needed to build them. In the meantime, humanity would be forced to adapt. Bicycles, horses, and walking would become the primary modes of transport. Localism would be the new global order, with communities relying on local food, local crafts, and local solutions to survive. The world, once a small, interconnected place, would become vast and isolated once more. The dawn of a new age, a sustainable world after the initial collapse, a new world would slowly begin to emerge from the ruins of the old. This new world would be defined by a radical and forced shift towards sustainability and localism. The remnants of humanity, having lived through the chaos of the immediate aftermath, would be forced to build a new society from scratch, one that is not built on a finite resource. This would be a slow, difficult, and painful process, but it would also lead to a more resilient and sustainable future. Cities would be radically re-engineered. The sprawling suburbs, once a symbol of a car-centric culture, would be abandoned. Populations would consolidate into compact, walkable urban centers, with a focus on self-sufficiency. Rooftop gardens, vertical farms, and urban aquaculture would become the new normal, allowing cities to feed themselves. Public transportation would be powered by clean energy, and the bicycle would be the new king of the road. Architecture would shift, with a focus on passive design and local materials to reduce energy needs. The world, once defined by its waste and excess, would become a model of efficiency and conservation. The global economy would be replaced by a collection of local and regional economies. Long-distance trade would be a thing of the past. Instead, nations would specialize in the production of goods that are essential to their survival, and trade would be limited to a few, critical resources. This would lead to a more equitable and more resilient world, with less emphasis on global markets and more on local communities. The power and influence of nations would no longer be determined by their access to fossil fuels, but by their ability to generate clean energy, produce food, and build a cohesive society. This new world would be more peaceful, as the primary cause of global conflict, the fight for oil, would be a relic of the past. The nations that once fought over oil would now be forced to cooperate to build a new, clean energy grid. This would be a world with less pollution, less waste, and a more profound connection to the natural world. This timeline, where oil ran out overnight, shows us the profound fragility of our modern world. It's a terrifying story of a sudden and irreversible collapse, a brutal return to a more primitive way of life. But it is also a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. After the initial chaos, humanity would be forced to confront its fundamental flaws and build a new, more sustainable future from the ashes of the old. The paradox of this timeline is that by losing a finite resource, we would have been forced to create a more resilient and more durable civilization. This is a powerful, and deeply moving, look at a future that could have been, and a reminder that our modern world, with all its comforts and conveniences, is built on a very thin foundation. In a world without oil, what do you think would be the first major technological breakthrough that would pull humanity out of the Dark Ages? If you had a choice, would you prefer to live in a world with a limited supply of oil, or a world that has already gone through the crisis and come out the other side? What do you think would be the most valuable resource in a world without oil? If you want to keep exploring the what-ifs and see how our world could be different, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Timeline Shift, and get ready for our next adventure.